Coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast, I review 3 amazing albums: the new Brainstorm, Plague of Rats, the Night Flight Orchestra, Give Us the Moon, and the new Thundermother album, Dirty and Divine. Plus, I talk about Iron Savior canceling this year's appearance at Progpower that was supposed to happen in September here of 2025. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited to be here with everybody today. This month marks the 27th year I have hosted this show. March 1st, 1998 was actually the day that I came up with the idea for the show and laid the groundwork down for what would eventually be a radio show that was pretty successful, and of course now being in the podcast format. So I'm really excited, especially thinking back of 27 years of a lot of fun that I've had doing this, and I plan on doing this for many more years. So with that said, I do appreciate any support you all give me for this program. So if you like what you see in here on this show, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you follow this show on any other streaming service or any other form of social media, by all means, give the show a like and a follow there. Have a lot to talk about. The new Brainstorm album, Plague of Rats. By the way, there's a new interview with Brainstorm on the podcast. I'm going to review the new Thundermother album, Dirty and Divine. There's an interview with Thundermother on the podcast as well. I'm going to talk about the Night Flight Orchestra with their new album entitled Give Us the Moon. But first, I'm going to get into Iron Savior. And for those that don't know, Iron Savior, one of my favorite power metal bands of all time, has canceled their appearance at Progpower coming up in September 2025. Now, why did they cancel this? They put a big post up on their Facebook page. Well, they canceled it because they do not like the political climate in the United States. They do not like the Trump administration. They say they don't really feel welcome here in America with the way that the Trump administration has handled things in Europe. And that's really probably the short answer, the short way of basically wording their press release, because that's really what it was based upon. They don't like the way I think Pete alluded to the visit from JD Vance and Trump and the way that they are handling the Ukraine situation. And of course, when they announced this, like in typical fashion, you had people coming at them, bashing them, a lot of people from the United States that are insulted by it. You have a lot of people in the United States that are supporting them for their decision. And you have, of course, quite a few people that really don't care about politics, that are just disappointed the band is not coming here. Okay, so I have a lot to say about this, because this is a band that I have followed for the entire 27-year history of this show. Folks, I'm really not angry about it. I mean, a lot of the people bashing them, believe it or not, have the same political views that I do, or at least mostly the same political views I do. But I understand why they are doing what they are doing. I understand how they feel and why they feel the way that they do. And I'm going to talk about why they feel the way that they do, because I think a lot of times here in the States, a lot of people here are just insulated from the politics of other countries. Not everybody, but there are quite a few that don't really get why they are angry. Now, when I get into this, folks, if your opinion is you're mad at the band, or you're pissed off at the band because they don't like Trump, or if you're going to support him, that's great. I'm not trying to change anybody's opinion. I just want to give a little bit of context as to why they feel the way that they do. I'm going to go into that. I'm going to talk about the consequences of what their decision has pretty much brought upon the band. Some of those consequences are bad, And actually, believe it or not, there is one good consequence of their decision, and I'll get to that towards the end of this. Let me start off by saying this. Number one, I am not going to be one of those people that's never going to listen to the band ever again because of them canceling a show. I think that's pretty petty. Just my opinion. I disagree with their decision, and I will talk about that more when I talk about the consequences of the decision that they've made. But it's obviously their decision. They could feel however they want to feel. And I understand where this comes from. The other thing I want to point out before I get into the reasoning behind why they feel the way that they do, I'm going to first point out that everybody in this band, anybody that has ever been affiliated with this band, has always been extremely nice to me. Pete Seelig has come on my show for most of the album cycles in regards to this band. He first came on my show the first year it aired from his mom's house in San Francisco. Pete has always been not only extremely nice, he's a good-hearted dude. And one thing I want to make very, very clear, anytime him and I have ever talked about politics, he has always been respectful of my opinion, even if he disagreed with it. He has never once insulted me. He has never once berated me. In fact, I can tell you the man has always been respectful when it comes to my opinion, even if we disagreed heavily on things, which we have. We've talked through Messenger. We've had discussions online. I want to make sure that's abundantly clear because I can tell you at least, and I'm not saying this is everybody, but I have had more people show more respect to me outside of the United States who have opposing political views than the people in the USA who have had opposing political views. People in the international community have always been more respectful. I'm not saying you don't have people that aren't disrespectful, because you do, but in general, I've actually been shown a lot more respect from people outside of this country than I have in it. That's just how it's been. Yeah, and I'm talking specifically, and I'm talking European people. I'm talking people from Germany. So, again, I want to make that clear. And I think the guy's an outstanding songwriter. And as I said at the beginning, am I going to stop listening to this band that's been coming on my show for 30 years? They would have to do something pretty bad for me to do that. And quite frankly, if I stopped listening to bands based on political views, I'd probably only listen to 25% of the bands I'm into. So I couldn't care less about that. Now let's talk about why they feel the way that they do. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, that press release listed a lot of things. I'm going to give you like 3 examples. I'm going to kind of try to break this down and simplify it to kind of give people an idea and a perspective as to why they feel the way they do. And keep in mind, Germany is a different country. It has a different history. These people view things much differently than we do. They have different laws than we do. And they have different concerns around the world than we do here. I want you to keep in mind, because when I bring these 3 items up, I think you'll understand where I'm coming from. Now, again, you may still hate the band for their decision. Great. I'm not really trying to change your mind. I just want to give people some context as to why they feel the way that they do. Let's start with one of the big reasons that they are pretty angry with the Trump administration, or that they are angry with the administration itself. Actually, all 3 of these items are going to have to do with that. Let's start off with the Ukraine situation. They do not like how that is being handled. And obviously you had Zelensky get up and get kicked out of the White House. And you had that big whole insane argument that happened on national TV. And again, I'm not going to get into the Ukraine issue. I'm just telling you, I'm speaking from their perspective, not mine. They don't view that as being handled the correct way. Now, to people here in the United States, most of the country, at least most of the people I've talked to, are angry about the amount of tax dollars that we have been sending there. That is the viewpoint of probably about half the country, if not a little bit more than that. That's how we view Ukraine. How the Germans and people in Europe view Ukraine is much different. Because here's the thing, if it goes south there, the first people that are going to have to deal with the consequences of it are going to be people in Europe. That whole situation is much closer to them, which creates a much, much higher level of anxiety than people here. See, in the United States, we're an ocean away and a continent away from where Ukraine is actually at. So it really doesn't, aside from, people in the United States being mad about tax dollars being spent over there, we don't have as much anxiety about it. But if you are in Europe, it's not that far away, especially Germany or Poland. It's right next to Poland, obviously. But, if you're in Germany, the distance from Germany to Ukraine is it would be like me driving from Ohio through Pennsylvania to New Jersey. It's not that far. So it is a much more sensitive subject for them. And therefore, it creates more anxiety. And if they do not feel and part of the reason it creates more anxiety is their countries really aren't involved with the negotiations. That's the other thing. Whatever the United States does with that country, with that situation, they have no control over the decisions being made there. It's a different country almost making that decision for them. So that's why there's so much anxiety with it. And the fact that, let's face it, a lot of people in Europe do not like Trump. In fact, they usually don't like Republican presidents in general. But again, that is creating a lot of anxiety for people over there. Now, do I think that situation will turn out okay in the end? Will we negotiate a peace and stuff like that? I'm optimistic, much more optimistic than them. But again, I don't have the anxiety associated with it because I don't live over there. They do. And let me give you two other pieces to this as well, which really pretty much angered all of them. So many of you are aware of J.D. Vance going over to Germany, criticizing their speech laws, and that pissed a lot of people off over there. Now, when I say criticizing their speech laws, what do I mean by that? Because here's the way that they look at it. When he came in and started doing that, the attitude is, who are you to tell us what to do? That's what a lot of German folks that I know have said to me. They have said that. Now, what are Germany's free speech laws? In Germany, let's say you are talking politics, okay? Say you're talking about a specific politician. Let's say, I don't know, maybe you don't like somebody, and again, I follow German politics quite closely. I have followed that country and its history for most of my life, and probably most of my friends are there. Their speech laws are very simple. If you have a debate in their parliament or there's a policy that's going to be made or whatever, and you don't like a certain politician, you can go online, you can criticize the policy, you can discuss it. But what they do not allow is for you to make fun of or threaten or make any kind of threatening comments towards not just politicians, but anybody. Otherwise, you could go to jail or you get fined. give you an example. There's a member of the Green Party. I can't remember which one it was. Somebody called the guy an ugly woman. The person got a fine. I think it was like 1,200 euros, 1,300 euros, whatever the case may be. There was somebody else called the vice chancellor of Germany at the time a dunderhead. He got in trouble. He got fined. Now, the difference, obviously, and if you're from Europe or you're from Germany and you're watching this, the biggest difference between our speech laws here and Germany is that you can pretty much do practically almost anything you want. For example, if people remember a few years back, Kathy Griffin, she's a comedian, celebrity, whatever the case may be. She had a photo of herself holding up a fake severed head of Trump. Holding it up like this. Holding up this fake head of Donald Trump. Numerous people have also posted memes of Kamala Harris with like 20 penises in her mouth. You won't get fined for that here, and you will not go to jail for that here. You might get some ridicule online. But our speech laws are pretty wide open for stuff like that. We allow a lot. But the Europeans don't view it like that. And so their viewpoint, when he came in and started criticizing their speech laws. Now, personally, do I agree with Germany's free speech or their speech laws? Absolutely not. The First Amendment here in the United States is so ingrained in me. I don't believe in that, but it's not. But their viewpoint, and I get where they're coming from, is that the United States shouldn't be coming in trying to bully them or bash their policies. So that's the next thing. And let me give you the one thing that probably pissed people off even more. I would say probably of anything that has happened so far this year that has really made a lot of people in Germany pretty pissed off. It's when J.D. Vance met with the AfD, which is short for Alternative for Germany. It is a party that is viewed in their country by their people, by most of their people, as a right-wing extreme Nazi party. That's how 80% of the country views them. That really angered a lot of people over there. It really honestly angered them. If you look at their election, that party finished second as far as the percentage of votes. But the way Germany's, just so you know, the way that their political system works, you have to have a minimum of 5% of the votes to get into parliament as a political party, as a political entity. I think the CDU, CSU, which is the traditional conservative party over there, I think they got over 30%, somewhere around there, pretty close. They had the most votes. But whoever has the most votes, like whoever finishes first, they don't have a majority of parliament. So what they do is they get together with the other political parties to form what you would call a coalition. There's a party called the SPD. There's the Greens. You have a lot of them. So what you do is you form a coalition with one or maybe two other parties. Then you get a majority of their parliament. And then you create policy from there. And some of those coalitions may be with parties that don't 100% align with you. But you come to an agreement and you govern. And that's pretty much how their parliament system, their coalition system works. So Vance went and met with the AfD, which made a majority of German people angry. And of course, it made the guys in Iron Savior angry because of how that party is viewed in Germany. It would be a lot like, somebody coming here, ignoring Donald Trump and going to talk to Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or something like that. That's kind of, all the Trump supporters, anybody that voted for Trump, a lot of Americans would be pretty insulted by that. That's the equivalent of Vance meeting with that party. Now, again, he made another comment in regards to their political system. He talked about a firewall. If you listen to the speech, what is the firewall? Well, none of these other political parties, they've created kind of a wall against ever collaborating with the AFD. And Vance is telling them you should drop that wall. The problem is, again, he's trying to tell them what to do. And therefore, he's telling them and these political parties to collaborate with a party 80% of the country hates. That I can tell you from everybody that I've talked to over there, that angered them the most because they took it as him ignoring everyone else. He ignored at the time who was the person that was the current chancellor of Germany. I think his name's Olaf Scholz. Ignored him and went and met with a political party, again, that these guys absolutely cannot stand and that most of the country does not like. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the German political system or all the party platforms. I've read them all. I follow them all. I know what each one of them represents. But again, they view that as a huge insult. And they also view that as, you know, Elon Musk was talking about that party, the AFD. They view that as them interfering with their elections. That's another thing that they've brought up. So these are three major things that made this band pretty angry. Now, it's pretty easy for us here in the United States to bash them for their decision. But personally, if it were me, let's take the Ukraine thing, for example. If I thought, let's say the tables were turned. Let's say there was some country, some superpower south of us fighting Mexico. Well, just going to kind of throw that out there. People here, if it was out of our control, which it wouldn't be, but let's say theoretically it was. And if we don't like the way somebody else is negotiating that and it directly affects us and we have no control over it, a lot of us here would be pretty angry. So again, these are things they feel very strongly about. And keep in mind, this was not something where they said they hate us. Because Pete knows I'm a conservative. I'm pretty sure he does. We've talked. And generally speaking, the people that where my political beliefs align with are the ones really bashing them. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. But that's the reason these guys are pissed. Now, let's talk about, do I agree with the decision or do I not agree with the decision? I think they should have still come over here and played. That's my opinion. I get why they have not. The anxiety is high. I totally understand. But I want them to understand that the people that are coming after them, first of all, most of those people, they weren't even going to Progpower to begin with. I could tell you that. I know a lot of the people going in there, we're not going to go to that show anyway. But I think a large majority, see, we have a thing called the squeaky wheel, right? This is how I call it. You have one wheel. You have 1,000 shopping carts. Each has 4 wheels. One wheel makes the most noise. The people coming after the band or the people in the comments supporting the band, fighting with each other, those are the squeaky wheels. It's like 2 wheels out of 1,000. A majority of people don't really care about the political aspect of this. They're just disappointed the band is not coming here. Now, what are the consequences of this? So there are consequences, both good and bad, to this. I know everyone's like, what would be the good consequence? Well, I'll tell you what that is here in a second. Here are the consequences, and this is the position they have put themselves into. When I say I don't agree with their decision, I don't think they really should have brought politics into it. That's just my opinion. But again, when you have that high anxiety, when you dislike the way the administration is going to possibly affect your life in a very big way, emotions are going to run high. It's just how it is. But here are the consequences. First, one of the biggest, most difficult things for power metal bands from Europe to do is to build an audience in the United States. In fact, aside from the Scorpions and Accept, who took a huge investment to actually get them their notoriety. Scorpions had a lot of records come out here before they really ended up getting noticed on more of the mainstream stage with a large fan base. Same with Accept. It's hard to build that fan base. And it's probably made it a little more difficult for them to do that. I mean, they've been around a long time, don't get me wrong, when they post their political reasons. Just a consequence of what is going to happen. The next consequence, and this is something they may or may not have taken into account. And again, they didn't make this decision easily, just so you know. I can tell you that for a fact. It was not something they just woke up one day and said, let's cancel it. They had been debating canceling it for quite a while. The other consequence is this. If they have to go on tour, if they get a tour offer for a band, let's say a band from America, let's say a band that openly supports Trump, and they get that tour offer, if they take that offer is really good and they take it, people will point to them and say, well, you hate Trump. Why are you touring with these guys? Now, I know better. I know those guys are not bashing Trump supporters or whatnot or whatever the case may be, because I've seen Pete talk to people that are big Trump supporters that he's completely fine with them as people. But people are going to point to that. I'm not saying me, but people are going to point to that and say, you guys are hypocrites. You took this stance. Why are you touring with these guys? Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So, Randy Blythe, singer for Lamb of God, went on tour with Pantera. And Lamb of God went on tour with Pantera. Now, why is that significant? Well, he has constantly gone off about how terrible Trump is and Elon and his salute, but then goes on tour with Pantera, which happens to have a singer named Phil Anselmo, who was banned in Europe for making a Nazi salute. People have pointed that out, that that's hypocritical, and that they only went on that stance for attention, and that he doesn't really back up his words. I mean, that's a criticism. So Iron Savior has potentially put themselves into that position. But I'm going to give you probably, believe it or not, taking that stance really did one thing for them that is a very good thing. It was a very unintentional thing. The band didn't intend to do this, but there are unintended consequences to decisions. This one is good. That post that they put up about why they canceled and that they were not coming here generated more reaction and probably more publicity on social media than they've seen in a very, very long time. Not to mention all of the metal media outlets put it out there. Because if there's an old saying, Gene Simmons used to say this, and I don't know if this is the exact quote, but he used to say, if nobody is talking about you, whether good or bad, you are not relevant. And right now, a lot of people are talking about Iron Savior. I saw a slew of comments from people that had never heard the band before. They've heard of them, but have never heard the band, who decided to check them out. I had people that messaged me because I commented on the Iron Savior page. These guys actually sound cool. What album would you recommend? I have had that. And they probably gained more attention, and probably, as weird as this is going to sound, more fans and more people noticing their music with that one post where they did not intend to have this happen. And it probably gained them some new fans. You know, majority of metal fans don't give a shit about people's political views. They really don't. But I can tell you a lot of people paid attention and started looking up this band and their music and listening to them. And that is a good consequence of what happened. Now, derangement and controversy sells. Remember that. So they may have unintentionally and inadvertently helped themselves. Because I could tell you, if you look at the reactions on that Facebook post, let's just take the Facebook post, for example. There are more reactions. There are more comments on that post. It might be one of the most, maybe the most engaging post they've ever put up. I didn't scroll back that far, but it ended up getting a lot of reactions. So with that said, I'm going to end it off with a few things. First of all, this band will always be welcome on my show. Again, I have quite a few opposite political views as they do. It doesn't really bother me, to be honest. A lot of people are insulted. I'm told I should be offended by it. I'm not. And in fact, just as I said about John Schaefer, when I had that big discussion about him, I would let John Schaefer come on this show and tell his story. I would never ask him loaded questions. I'd allow him to talk and express himself freely. And I would do the exact same thing for Pete from Iron Savior if he came on the show again and wanted to talk about this stuff. I wouldn't ask him loaded questions. But as I always say, I have conversations and I do not do interviews. That is how my show has always been. So he could feel free to talk about what he wants to talk about. It doesn't bother me. Just like it wouldn't bother me if John Schaefer came on here, wanted to talk freely about everything that happened with him over the last 4 years. Because, again, he's had a lot of, obviously, the January 6th thing. He's had a lot of crazy stuff going on. And he has endured a lot of criticism and had his name dragged through the mud as well. But the point being, the band will always be welcome on the show. Now, this last part is going to go to the people that have criticized me for still wanting to listen to this band, not being offended by this, and have called me like a fence walker or a sellout or whatever the case, whatever you want to call me. I don't care. I really don't give a shit. Because in the end, your opinion will have no bearing on who I associate with, who I have on this show. And nobody is going to tell me who I affiliate myself with. I don't care if you disagree with my political stances. I do not care if you agree with me and are aligned with most of my beliefs. I'm going to do the show my way. And I'm going to let people on this show, even if they disagree with me, to be able to tell their story. With that said, I'll end it off with, I hope Iron Savior does come back to the States again. I'm sure they will. And I can't wait for their next album, which I'm going to assume comes out in 2026. And again, to be honest with you, I wasn't like offended. It didn't affect me that much. Aside from the fact that I went and said, look, these guys are good guys. They've always been very, very nice anytime I've ever interacted with any of them. And Pete's a really good dude. And he's always been respectful. I want to end it with that. Let's move on to something more positive in this episode. Let's talk about the new Brainstorm album, Plague of Rats. Folks, if there's a power metal band out there from Europe that does not sound like anybody else, it's Brainstorm. Brainstorm is a band. They sound more American than European, in my opinion. But I can tell you that I have followed this band for about as long as this show has been around, just like I brought up Iron Savior earlier. And Andy Frank, to me, is an incredible vocalist, super cool dude. I have always had him on my show over the years. I met him on the Brave Words of Bloody Knuckles 6-pack shows that they had here in Cleveland, organized by the guys in Brave Words of Bloody Knuckles. Just an incredible group of guys. I had Torsten Elfeld on this show as well to talk about their new album. It's called Plague of Rats, which I think is an outstanding album. And honestly, the last 3 albums, counting this one, are probably some of the band's best material. I think it is the band's best material, but man, they've been very consistent and they've had some great records. I mean, I remember when I first heard Metis Mortis. I mean, that was the album that really made me love this band. I had the first 2 albums, which didn't have Andy singing on them. I had their records, but Metis Mortis and Ambiguity, those 2 records are phenomenal. But Brainstorm is a much different sounding power metal band. They sound nothing like Halloween or anybody else like that. They've definitely carved out their own sound. They have some like Indian, and when I say Indian, I mean India. A little bit of influence from music from India, sometimes incorporated into their music. And it is, and when I talk about bands from Europe having more of an American, more of a darker sound, they definitely fit that bill. And there aren't many power metal bands from Europe that are like that. I think Mystic Prophecy would probably be the closest I could think of that have kind of that darker power metal sound. Like they don't sound Gamma Ray or Halloween or Blind Guardian. They don't sound like any of those bands. But Brainstorm has really put out an outstanding record. And to talk about the album and to talk about their producer and a big reason as to why they sound the way that they do, check out this interview clip with Torsten Elfeld from Brainstorm. Welcome, everybody, back to the Metal Command show, and I'm here with Torsten Elfeld of the band Brainstorm, one of the original members, and of course, he does play guitar in the band, and Brainstorm, of course, being a band I have followed since the first record came out. Torsten, it's really nice to talk to you. I've never spoken to you before, but I am really excited to have this conversation. You have a new album out, Plague of Rats, which, again, is another great record in a streak of really good albums. And let's talk about the album and maybe the theme behind it. It's the songs, when I listen to it, seem to be a little bit related to each other. And maybe you could talk a bit about the album itself and give us some details on it.
Oh yes, for sure. First of all, thanks for having us. And Plague of Rats is it's not a concept album. So we're not a concept album band, but as when you write the songs for an album, of course, many stories may connect to each other because of recent happenings that happen in the world. So
sure.
We're not a concept album band, and one of the main topics is, as you can see on the cover, is like bringing back those Eastern harmonies and stories a little bit,
right.
which we very much focused on, for example, on the Soul Temptation album.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because this record again is I think it's phenomenal. You know, it's something weird. I remember when the other band that he was in, Simforce, kind of broke up. It seemed that the records got a little better. I don't know why that is. Maybe he was able to concentrate on the band a little bit more. But the songwriting on these last three, or probably the last four, are probably the four best records I think you've done. And just so you know, I followed the band when the first album came out, which was a long time ago. And something happened, you know, with the songwriting on with this band, because I can tell you that, you know, Midnight Ghost blew me out of the water, and it was not what I expected. And then obviously the next two records, including this one, I think are great. And, you know, does something change, or, you know, with the songwriting? Because, you know, the band was great. You know, Manus Mortis was like a huge, like, underground cult classic type of record when that came out. That always seemed to be the album where people really ended up getting into you guys. But something in these last three records, man, I think is great. And has anything changed starting starting in 2018? Because I don't know, maybe it's me, but these last 3-4 records have been just amazing.
Yes, absolutely. It's we have absolutely the same opinion. It's not that too many things changed, but after the Scary Creatures album, we changed the producer. Since Midnight Ghost, we are working with Zeeb Leverman for the last 3 albums now: Midnight Ghost, Wall of Skulls, and Plague of Rats. And he's a phenomenal guy. And for us, it's something like the 6th band member. So he's so incredibly talented with everything that has to do with music, songwriting, melodies, and he's definitely one of the main reasons for the level up, so to say.
Okay.
Without having to lose our Brainstorm identity. So when we go into the studio, it's, let me say, 90% of the songs are as they are, but the 10% input that Steve gives us to the arrangements,
right?
His input is much more than 10%, you know. But I'm relating to the songwriting stuff. It's exactly the level up I think we need, and yeah, the last 3 albums have been, or at least the last 2. Plague of Rats is still coming out February 28th.
Right.
But the last 2 have been one of the most successful albums in the band's career.
First, I'm talking about the new album, and of course, part of the reason the band's sounding the way that they do, because of their producer. I think that makes a huge difference, folks. Having a really good producer as like another member of the band, really helping you carve your sound, is extremely important. I think that's a big reason why this album and the 2 previous to it sound as good as they do. They had some really, really good, they have some really, really good music on this one. They had a guest vocalist on this album who I think is a phenomenal singer. She's from Leaves' Eyes. Alina Sorella. She sings on Your Soul That Lingers in Me. That's the name of the song that she sings on. The album's very, very good. Again, darker sound. I would say there is not a bad song on it. But again, it continues on. Like, if you liked the 2 previous albums, in fact, if you've liked any of their albums, you're going to love this one. I would probably put it in my top 2 or 3 by the band. I'm not 100% sure if it's my favorite album by them, but it's definitely, for me, a 10 out of 10 record. Because ever since I ended up getting my electronic press kit, I have not stopped listening to this record at all. I've listened to it every day since I first heard it back. I think it was somewhere in the beginning of January. So I love the record. I think it's great. It's not that dissimilar from the 2 previous albums. Catchy songs. You know, they have their own sound, which is very rare for bands today. And it feels crazy because I remember when this band first came on the scene, I thought of them as a young band, but they've been around like 27, 28 years now. So a really great record, though. A lot of these Indian influences, from India, some of those musical influences are on this record. It's kind of like if you mix like a darker sounding power metal band with some music from a country that most people really aren't taking elements from. That's part of the uniqueness of this album. And some of the lyrics are also all about mythology in India, stuff like that, just stuff you don't normally hear bands sing about. This is the first time I actually ever interviewed Torsten. So, definitely a really nice guy. I'd always had Andy on the show. And I'm going to end off this review with one thing that has nothing to do with the album. But they had an album come out called Memorial Roots. I'm going to kind of end it off here in a second. Memorial Roots, I thought musically was a fantastic record. But the production in the mix sounded absolutely terrible. It was like the one disappointing thing for me when I heard that. I heard that and I'm like, man, the songs are great. The album sounds terrible. And it was actually disappointing when I had gone on the radio show and actually talked about that. Well, they ended up remixing it and reissuing it, and the album sounds like a million times better. It sounds the way it should have sounded. Well, here's Torsten talking about that because it did bring up the Memorial Roots album. Check out this interview clip from our interview. Check it out. I want to go back and talk about one thing that did happen, and I thought was a very good thing. When you remixed Memorial Roots, remember when that came out? I remember when that album came out, I liked it, but I was disappointed with how it sounded. And then probably seven years later, you remixed it. I remember, and in fact, I remember listening to it, the remixed version of that record, and I was like, I think it was the song "Cross the Line" when he first did the remix, and that, that kind of like just real fast riff in the beginning of the song. I was like, man, they improved this. They remixed this album, improved this. Talk about that, because I remember Memorial Roots did get a lot of bad press when it came out, but I think you more than compensated for that press with the remix and obviously bonus tracks and stuff like that.
Yes, definitely. It's Memorial Roots was kind of it was a hard album to make. Everything was kind of, how can I say that? It felt very dark around the band, not because of the band not doing well. But
yeah,
we changed to AFM and we had the songs written and they felt great, but we wanted to have a different approach to the sound. We wanted to have more dynamic. And when we did the mix, we felt, well, that's what the album needs. But looking back at it, I think we went a step too far, and people didn't get it. And as people are used to a sound that is very compressed and compensated, not open to dynamics anymore, that's why people didn't get what we tried to express with how we mixed the album, And when you get that kind of feedback, it's not a good decision to say, well, it was a fault and we change it now immediately, because there was a plan behind it, and the plan was just that didn't go well, Mm-hmm. So it of course took some time, and until we found the time to really have time for a real remix, not only a remaster, because the album needed a real remix. And we had so many good songs in addition from that songwriting phase. So we decided to make it a real remix and remaster thing with, I think it was 6 bonus tracks.
Yeah, I had a lot of bonus tracks, actually.
And and then all of a sudden, people that hated the original version loved the new version.
Yeah. Yeah, it for me, it was really the sound. The song, it's interesting you mentioned that. The songs on that album are unlike anything I think you guys have ever written before or since then. It was just, it was such a different record, but the songs themselves I thought well written. It almost felt a lot more progressive, probably more than power metal for me. And that to me, I remember what I said about the album, aside from the mix not being the greatest for me, I thought the songwriting and the route you went down was really cool, because that album, you kind of evolved in your songwriting from what you were doing before.
Absolutely.
And it was so much different. But then now I listen to the records you're putting out now, and you do still, ever since then, you still have some of that progressiveness in your music ever since that album came out. And I always felt that for me, that was an important record for you guys, because it was a progression, from what you were doing in the past. So, but yeah, I loved the remix. I mean, the bonus tracks were really, really cool. And that whole package was great when it came out. And I had almost forgotten about the album a little bit until I read that, back in 2016 that was coming out. And I thought the job that was done, the remix, was great. And I think you really hit a home run, as we say over here, with that. So, but I always thought Memorial Roots was kind of a turning point for the band in the songwriting department in a good way.
Yeah.
So, I figured I'd bring that up because the other day, before I did this interview, I'm listening to the back catalog and I'm like, man, I forgot this album got remixed. So,
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's great to having had the chance to do that remix. It's of course everything is a question of money, and it was a huge project, to open up all the files and do a real remix, which of course was a financial risk, but we wanted to give the album the sound that it deserves.
Yeah, no,
and we're still very lucky that we did that.
Torsten talking about the Memorial Roots album Brainstorm put out and them remixing it. So all in all, again, Plague of Rats is a 10 out of 10. It's an incredible album. If you like power metal, and if you like the darker edged power metal, that's probably a little more American sounding with a few different elements that most people are not using, this album is for you. Especially if you've heard the band before and you loved the last two albums before this. So with that said, I'm going to go into break. When I come back, I am going to be talking about the Night Flight Orchestra and their new album and the new Thundermother album. I'll be right back after this. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Okay, back here on the Metal Command Podcast, I'm going to review the new Night Flight Orchestra album, Give Us the Moon. Now, many of you may be like, why are you talking about this band on a heavy metal show? Well, it has heavy metal musicians in it, and that is why I'm going to talk about it. So obviously there are members of Soilwork in this, most notably Bjorn Speed Strid. Really, really cool dude. Really good guy. Bjorn is, I've interviewed him a few times, really, really phenomenal singer. He'd be in my top 25 favorite vocalists of all time. The guy is an outstanding death metal vocalist, and he's also a great singer of AOR retro rock music, which is what Night Flight Orchestra is. Before I get into the record, let me say this. I can count on one hand how many times I like a side project or another band, somebody from a more notable band decides to form and record an album with. Give you some examples. Category 7. This has got a bunch of people from a lot of really big bands. John Bush sings for the band, right? I do not like that band anywhere close to how much I like Armored Saint, right? But I have never, with a couple exceptions, I have never liked a side project or a second band better than the previous band somebody came from. With one of those exceptions, though, being the Night Flight Orchestra. I love Soilwork, folks. Soilwork is one of my probably one of my favorite bands of all time. The Night Flight Orchestra is probably one of the few times where I like the other band these guys are in just as much as the band they came from. Now it's different. It's considered AOR, more 70s and 80s retro rock, but everything about this group is amazing. It really is. And Give Us the Moon. In fact, Night Flight Orchestra has never put out a bad album. Every one of these records has been like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 for me. This one is no different. I don't know what it is. There's something about the songwriting within this group that has really inspired me, has really had a profound positive effect on me. I would say the earlier stuff has more of a 70s vibe to it, like the first, I don't know, couple albums at least. And then they kind of moved into the more 80s, 70s, 80s, like early 80s to mid 80s retro rock type stuff. But it's amazing to me to listen to a band like Soilwork, which is basically mostly a death metal band, a melodic death metal band. And then you hear most of these guys come into this band. You hear Speed come into this band, sounding the way that he does, writing the songs that they do. But it's a great record. Has a total 70s, 80s vibe to it, like all of their music pretty much does. And it's a band that I absolutely love. So how would I rate this compared to their other albums? So you had Aromantic 2, and then obviously the first one. I like it better than those two albums. Those two albums were great. I like Give Us the Moon better than both of those records. Hard to say. I like the second album, Skyline Whispers. I love that one a lot. But it's really hard to rank this one. It really is difficult for me to figure out. Every song on it, obviously, in my opinion, is phenomenal. There's a song called Stewardess, Empire's Hot Mess, and The Captain of Pain. That's the last song. That's definitely one of the better songs in the album. In fact, if you were to go listen to this record, I would say the second half of it is better than the first half. Just my own preferences. Like, I have it on vinyl as well as CD. Side 2 starts with Cosmic Tide. I think from track 8 to track 13, that's the best side of the album. It's like the further you get into it, the better it sounds. But it's like this band places the melodies in the right place. The songwriting is like perfect from the era. Like if this band had come out in the 80s or the 70s, they would be huge. Unfortunately, the music industry is not what it used to be, but they would be huge. And of course, you're always in Soilwork, because they've ended up getting a lot more melodic. You can't help but figure that a lot of the influences and the musical influences that have influenced the Night Flight Orchestra kind of made its way into Soilwork. I think Bjorn Speed Stritt has become a better singer since he started doing the Night Flight Orchestra. I think he sounds better. Not only is he a clean vocalist, but obviously his death metal vocals have always been phenomenal. He's just a unique frontman. He really is. Now, the last few Soilwork albums have been awesome. You know, they had a little bit of a dip at one point where some of the records weren't so great. But in general, over the last, let's say 15 years, they've been pretty good. So I like this album. Title track, A Paris Point of View, Runaways, Wait to Spend the Night. The second half of the album is better than the first. That's kind of how I look at it, folks. What do I rate this album? Give it a 9 out of 10. Great record. Not sure where I rank it in their discography. It's definitely probably in the top half. It's hard. But if you like 70s and 80s AOR retro rock, even if you are watching it, say for whatever reason you stumble across this video and you're not into heavy metal music, you would probably dig these guys. And let's move into the last record I want to talk about. That is the new Thundermother album, Dirty and Divine. Linnea Wikström, who is the singer of the band right now, and Philippa, their guitar player, both came on the show. Both of these ladies are really, really nice. They were a lot of fun to talk to. I have followed Linnea's career a bit. She was in Therion for a while. Tremendously awesome singer. And Philippa is a great songwriter, in my opinion, especially over the last probably 3 records Thundermother has done. So this album, Dirty and Divine, came out earlier in February. And I think it's an outstanding record. It has a really big 70s vibe to it. Probably, as far as the songwriting style. But the thing about Thundermother that really makes them a great band, and the thing about Philippa that I do have a lot of respect for, is the fact that, the band has had some lineup changes, but they have still managed to put out great albums despite the lineup changes. Now, the lineup before this, I actually met Thundermother back, I like to say it was in 2022, 23. I don't remember what year it was now. I mean, it was a while ago. And they came to Cleveland. They were touring with the Scorpions. They had a day off and played a small show in Cleveland called the Beachland Ballroom. And I went and met him. I went and interviewed him. That's an all-female band from Sweden. So I went and met him, talked to them. They were really, really cool, really, really nice. After the tour, 3 of the members were gone. Philippa was the only one left. She's the lone original member, basically. And they started writing. She recruited new people, started writing an album. But I always have respect for people that can bring the right people in and find the right musicians to really make an album great, especially if you're going through them. Like Jeff Waters from Annihilator does that. Ian Lukazin with all the different singers that he has with Arion. I can go on and on with people that are good at doing that. But that's one thing I do respect about her. The album itself, and one of the things about her songwriting, the songwriting on this album specifically, any one of these songs could be a single. So in other words, when I go and I rant about people at record labels and then I talk about them and how they pick terrible singles off the album, you could pretty much pull any single off of this album. Any song, make it a single, it would represent the album very well. There are a few songs that are favorites of mine. The first song that I absolutely loved when I listened to this album, and actually, just like I talked about the Night Flight Orchestra album earlier, the second half of this record, this album gets better as you listen to it. The second half of the album, I like better than the first half. Not saying the first half is bad, but the second half of the record is great because I found myself repeating a lot of the songs on the second half of the album. So when you get halfway through the album, track 6, it's called I Left My License in the Future. I love the lyrics and I love the song. And this is what these ladies had to say about it when I brought this song up. This is from our interview. Check it out. One of the songs I thought was interesting is I Left My License in the Future. Yeah. So I want to talk about that for a minute. I'll talk about that track because it's an interesting title. It has some interesting lyrics. Maybe go into depth of what that song is actually about.
Yeah, okay. That's also interesting because, as we said, English isn't the first language. And I was thinking of the implications of that when I wrote it. Maybe this is just, sounds good to me and it's going to sound really Swinglish and weird in English. But you know what? Let's just go for it. So what it is was me and my mother. We were driving through a thunderstorm. And mind you, I was not driving because I cannot drive. I never took my license. And we were driving and it was just pouring down rain, dark outside. And she was like, you have to keep me occupied with something. Let's write a song, she goes. So, we wrote that song in the car.
Yeah.
And it's basically about me being the number one procrastinator on planet Earth.
And I love the song. Linnea sent it to me and I was like, yeah, that's the single.
So basically procrastinating and getting your license.
Yeah. I mean, I chose to, I left my license in the future. I think I forgot it in a bar. I decided to go have a beer instead of maybe going to the driver's lessons or whatever. So it's very poetic like that.
And that's them talking about, that's Philippa and Linnea, of course, talking about the song, I Left My License in the Future. But it's a great record. There's a song in here called Bright Eyes that I think is great. My favorite song is probably either I Left My License in the Future or Dead or Alive. And then you have American Adrenaline to end the album off, which is also one of my favorite tracks on the album. But the point is that I think this band has gotten to the point where pretty much every song they put out, you could release it as a single and it would do well. It would represent the album. The songs are simple. They are straight to the point. They are very catchy. They're very, very good. Another 9 out of 10 album for me. It's actually, believe it or not, it's been a great start to the year. I mean, I've had a lot of really great records. I've been very lucky of a lot of these albums because it's going to make it that much more difficult towards the end of the year to pick my album of the year. It was already difficult last year. This year is probably going to be even worse. There's a lot of great records coming out. So I love Dirty and Divine. It definitely has a 70s vibe to the music. The way the songs are written. 70s meets the modern day, as you might want to say, just the melodies and everything like that. But I think it's a phenomenal album. I think Linnea sounds fantastic. And don't get me wrong, I like the lineup before as well. But there's something about this record. You can feel the chemistry between these ladies, and the chemistry is very good. So definitely a 9 out of 10 for me as far as Dirty and Divine by Thundermother goes. So that's all I have for the Metal Command podcast today. Thanks for watching and listening. And as I always say, if you want to support the show, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video. And if you follow this show on any other form of social media, by all means, give us a like and a follow there. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.